This is Stories of Impact, the art and science of human flourishing. In every episode, we travel the world to explore intersections of science and spirituality. I'm your host, writer Tavia Gilbert, and along with journalist Richard Sergey, every first and third Tuesday, we look through a new lens at old traditions, hear from new generations as they dream up innovative solutions, and learn new ways to make sense of modern life. When Joshua Plotnik was a kid, he wanted to become a veterinarian and daydreamed of a future caring for animals large and small. By the time he got to college, he eagerly worked with every type of vet he could think of, from small animal vets to large animal horse veterinarians. On a summer break from his undergraduate studies at Cornell University, he interned as a zookeeper at the Central Park Zoo, and a mentor there encouraged him to reach out to the internationally acclaimed primatologist, Dr. Franz de Waal, known for his research on cooperation in primates. When the young student approached Dr. de Waal to ask if he might take him on as a PhD candidate, Dr. de Waal extended an invitation, the chance of a lifetime. Dr. Plotnik started researching chimpanzee behavior, where a lot of psychology researchers land, he says.
Psychologists that are interested in understanding how cognition or intelligence evolve in humans typically look at our closest living relatives. So you would do experiments or study the great apes, chimpanzees, bonobos, gorillas, orangutans, or you might go further back to monkeys. The idea here being that if you can demonstrate certain cognitive abilities in those species, you are trying to identify in what point in our evolutionary past did a particular cognitive trait emerge.
But Dr. Plotnik's interests soon expanded.
Interestingly, and maybe not unexpectedly, there are other species that are quite evolutionarily distant from us. So if we look at elephants or dolphins or corvids, which is the bird family that includes crows and ravens, or even domesticated species like dogs, we find similar cognitive abilities, particularly in things like cooperation or problem solving and other traits as well. So the question is, how did those similarities evolve across these different species if it's not due to a common ancestor? And the answer is likely environmental pressures that drove the need for the evolution of more flexibility in animal behavior.
With that fascination driving his work, Dr. Plotnik soon asked Dr. de Waal for his support setting up a field site where he could immerse himself in researching the behavioral flexibility of one of the largest animals he'd worked with yet, elephants. And so, for the last 2 decades, Dr. Plotnik's research has focused on wild and captive elephants primarily located in Thailand. Now an associate professor of psychology and the director of the Comparative Cognition for Conservation Lab at Hunter College, City University of New York, he's currently wrapping up a years-long study about elephant intelligence. And in the middle of his career, Dr. Plotnik is still just as inspired by animal behavior as he was when he was his young son's age. You might hear his kids in the background.
I get asked a lot by kids. You've worked with elephants, you've worked with birds, you've worked with chimpanzees, you've worked with humans. Who's smarter? How can you rank the intelligence of these species? It's a great question from children, at least they're thinking about it. And I always say, we don't actually compare the intelligence of animals in that way. We don't rank it. Instead, what we say is, how well adapted are these animals for the world in which they live? Obviously, from an evolutionary perspective, we want to know how well adapted are they for the environments in which they evolved. But now, more importantly than ever, we're interested in how well adapted are they to the environments in which they now face themselves having to survive. I think that's the safest way to measure intelligence. Elephants can communicate using very low frequency of sound, which allows them to send sound waves through the ground or potentially over diverse distances, allows them to communicate in ways that make sense in dense forests or across huge savanna landscapes. That means they've evolved in a way that allows them to adapt pretty well. They have an incredible sense of smell that far exceeds our olfactory sense, an incredible sense of hearing that far exceeds our capacity for acoustic communication. And they must be using that in a way that allows them to express themselves in ways that we can't. Is that in terms of cognition? Is it in terms of behavior? We're starting to get at that. I think we understand a little bit about that, but there's still a lot of unanswered questions. But something that I'm beginning to become more aware of is I don't think diverse intelligence is necessarily only applies to differences between species. The diverse intelligence is between species, but also within species. Individuals express their behavior and cognition in many different ways and ways that differ from their friends and their family group members and from strangers. And that's something that we're still learning a lot about.
The unanswered questions inspire Dr. Plotnik to keep exploring so that there's an opportunity for him to
really better understand that flexibility and capacity for adaptation.
Dr. Plotnik says that flexibility and adaptation include
cooperative action. So animals working together to cooperate. My overarching interest here is cognitive flexibility. How flexible are elephants in their behavior, whether they're tested alone or in a collective? Can they change their behavior when the obstacles put in front of them change? The question, though, is what's the intelligence part of it? So what underlies cooperation? Cooperation is pretty ubiquitous among social animals, but is there flexibility in that collective behavior? Do they think about their cooperative relationships? I think what the bigger question here is whether or not the intelligence that underlies cooperative action, cooperative behavior, collective behavior is different than the cognition that underlies individual behavior. Is there a switch that happens when animals are doing something together versus when they're doing something alone? Or is it that every individual animal is doing something cognitive and that all that cognition together results in some sort of solution or action? Or is it that when they're working together, all of a sudden there's something else that's triggered? And it's hard to answer that question. It's a very big pie in the sky sort of question, but I think we're fascinated by that.
Exploring these hard-to-answer questions about animal intelligence might help us better understand our own.
There are some things about humans that makes us unique in the animal world, but there are many more things that I think make us so much more like our animal cousins, relatives than we had originally thought. We're not nearly as unique as I think we once thought that we were. We, as a collective group of comparative and cognitive psychologists, have been doing enough research over the past 50 to 100 years that I feel confident in saying we are much closer to our animal relatives than we once thought. But we're still only scraping at the surface here. There's still so much we have to learn about how animals communicate with each other, how they cooperate with each other, how they make decisions in their physical and social worlds. And we still don't know much about the cognitive abilities that underlie those expressions of behavior. And the more we learn, I think the more we are getting at a better understanding of our own place as humans among all these other species. When you see high levels of cognitive expression, you also see considerable variation within that. It's still impossible to know what an animal thinks and how they feel because we can't put ourselves in their heads. What we do is we design experiments that we hope get as close to an understanding of how they think and feel as we can.
One of the most successful experiments Dr. Plotnik and his colleagues have done to test flexibility and capacity for elephant adaptation started with a simple upside-down Y tube built out of PVC pipe. When researchers dropped food down the tube, they were first testing an individual elephant's intelligence, gauging
how the elephant responds once they've experienced the fact that food being dropped down the tube comes out of one of the two holes unpredictably. The elephant doesn't know which hole it's going to come out of, and you want to see what they do. There's a lot of different strategies that an elephant could employ. They could take their trunk and just put it under one hole, but what they might also do is recognize that not only can they not predict which side it's going to come out of, but they could account for both of those options by covering both holes. At the individual level, can they learn that there are two potential outcomes and account for that?
That helps the researchers evaluate intelligence at the individual level.
If you want to then move on to collective intelligence, you want to see whether or not the elephants change their strategy. So now they recognize that I'm in a partnership. Will I account for the two options as a collective? Now it's not about me maximizing my own reward and getting 100%. Now it's about, as a collective, can we maximize a reward? And the easiest way to do that would be I put my trunk under one hole and you put your trunk under the other.
Dr. Plotnik understands that what they learn from this experiment with elephants in captivity isn't necessarily what they would learn if they were working with wild elephants. One of the reasons, he says, is that
when we're talking about collective intelligence, a lot of the collective behavior you see in elephants in the wild is not foraging. It's not about food. But a lot of our cognitive tasks involve the use of food.
In fact,
collective intelligence in elephants is largely driven by the fact that they live in matriarchal family groups, led by usually the oldest, most knowledgeable, wisest female, as it were. And all the other elephants in that herd are usually adult females. Their cooperative behavior is around the cooperative care of young. It's working together to protect other individuals from potential predators. They don't work together to get access to finite resources. They do work together to migrate across the savanna or through the forests in Thailand, but when they're eating, they're not working together. We're expanding research from the lab into the wild. The study of wild animal cognition is also relatively new and exciting, and it's something I feel very privileged to be a part of. Working with captive elephants allows us to control for a lot of factors we can't control for in the wild. We can develop experimental and control paradigms, that is the hallmark of comparative psychological research, in captivity that we cannot do in the wild.
The privilege of working with wild elephants comes with responsibility. The researchers have to consider not only the conditions of captivity itself, but of the elephant's human captor.
We have to be very careful about how we interpret the results in captivity. The captive elephants we work with have what's called a mahout. They have an individual human caretaker that is responsible for that individual elephant, and they have a very strong, complex relationship that for some individuals goes back decades. Some mahouts work with their elephant their entire lives. The exciting thing about complementing what we're doing in captivity with wild research is that in the wild now, we can try to adapt those experiments to put them in the animal's natural habitat where they're not interacting with people. They don't have this long history of experiencing humans or being trained by humans, and hopefully we see a more natural expression of their behavior. That, I think, can complement what we're seeing in captivity. The benefit of continuing to work with elephants in captivity is that there are certain cognitive abilities that we cannot test in the wild because we don't have that level of control. But what we can do in the wild that we can't do in captivity is we can say, look at what elephants are doing. Look at their expression of behavior and cognition when they're doing what they normally do in the wild, when they're acting the way they normally act in the wild. There's a very strong link between the study of intelligence and what's going on in the wild. A question that I've been really fascinated about is how can all of this research that focuses on how different animals, not only between species, but within species, can tell us about how animals make decisions in the wild. One way of looking at this is individual differences in cognition. So how is cognition expressed differently from one elephant to the next? Different personality traits from one elephant to the next, how are they expressed in the wild?
Dr. Plotnik feels some urgency around his research.
There are certain conflicts occurring between humans and wildlife, and we're talking about elephants here, that seem to occur between people and certain individual animals. It's not every elephant is coming into conflict with people, it's certain individuals. What's really important about this now goes beyond understanding expressions of intelligence in humans and non-human animals. Now it's really important because species like the Asian elephant are endangered. There's less than 50,000 of them left on the Asian continent. And understanding their flexibility and whether they're flexible enough is going to lead to solutions to protecting them from going extinct. Because the reason that they're threatened and endangered is because they live in habitat that is undergoing rapid anthropogenic change. They live in habitat heavily influenced by human behavior and human population growth and agriculture and industrialization. And that's leading to elephants losing their lives. But the only way they're going to be able to survive is if they can quickly adapt to human behavior and the change to their natural environment. I think the best way they're going to be able to do that is if they're cognitively and behaviorally flexible. And we need to learn more about that flexibility if we're going to come up with solutions to protect them.
Dr. Plotnik hopes his study supports a more symbiotic relationship between humans and elephants.
So, for example, one of the landscapes we work at in Thailand is the Salapra Wildlife Sanctuary. And in this sanctuary, we believe there exists at least 300 individual elephants. And these elephants live inside a protected area that is off limits to people except for park rangers and researchers. It's a wonderful landscape. It's about 1,000 square kilometers. The problem is there's no huge fence set up around the sanctuary. Instead, encroaching on the borders of the sanctuary are farmers' agricultural properties. So they're crop fields, sugarcane, cassava, corn, pineapples, food that they eat in Thailand, food that's exported to countries like the United States. And these elephants are coming out of the protected area and coming into the farmers' crop fields and foraging in those crop fields. And as you can imagine, the farmers are pretty upset about this. But as a comparative psychologist, what's fascinated me is the stories from farmers that they can identify the specific elephants that are doing this, and they talk about the intelligence of those elephants and how those elephants get around the farmers' strategies to keep them out.
It was about a decade ago, when Dr. Plotnik was invited to attend a meeting with farming villagers, that he began to learn about their challenges with elephants and their strategies.
One villager said, I'm really angry about the fact that captive elephants are being released into my crop field at night to forage. And I actually raised my hand and I said, that's really interesting. Why do you think that those are captive elephants that were being released into your crop fields? Why don't you think it's a wild elephant? And he said, well, I saw this one elephant come up to the back of my house, turn on a water spigot, drink from it, and then turn it off and walk away. Well, wild elephant couldn't do that. Only a captive trained elephant could do that. And I knew the second he said that absolutely a wild elephant could do that. These elephants are highly adaptable, very intelligent. All they would have to do is either observe someone turning that water on and following suit. They're very exploratory. What that potentially indicates is that elephants that are coming into these crop fields are displaying different cognitive and/or personality traits than elephants that are tested inside the protected area. The big question here that we're trying to get at is what makes an elephant more or less likely to take risks and to go into crop fields to interact with people and to get access to food? Are there different cognitive traits that are expressed in those elephants? Are there different behavioral or personality traits that are expressed in those elephants? That tells us a lot about individual variation in cognition, which is an important question for comparative psychology, but it also might inform our design of conflict mitigation strategies that instead of just being applied to elephants as a species, so for example, putting up an electric fence to keep elephants out or chasing elephants away with trucks, instead we target mitigation to specific individuals based on what we know about their behavior and cognition. And that got me really interested in thinking about all the things we were studying and how applying that to this problem that the villagers were facing could not only help the villagers, but also help the elephants and instead lead to better coexistence.
How does a human farmer mitigate against potentially 300 different elephants, each of which has a unique personality?
This is a 8,000 pound animal that has an incredible capacity to rip things, tear things, crush things. And so we have to build something that is elephant proof. The way that farmers typically try to mitigate the conflict on their own is there are a number of different strategies that they employ. They build watchtowers and they sit in the watchtowers all night. It always blew my mind when I talked to the farmers and some of them told me they hadn't slept in their own bed in years because every night they're in their crop field watchtowers waiting for the elephants to come. They've got walkie-talkies or cell phones and they're communicating with other farmers in other crop fields about the movement patterns of the elephants. And as soon as an elephant is getting close to their crop field, they run down the watchtower, they get in their pickup truck, and they either try to drive the elephant out of the crop field using the pickup truck, or they've built these kind of amateurish firecrackers, M80 firecrackers, that they shoot over the elephants' heads and they make a loud noise to try to scare the elephant away. They build rudimentary electric fences where they take a hot wire, they attach it to a car battery that shocks the elephant but doesn't kill them. I think they have a great respect for the elephants. They have no desire to kill them. They just want to keep the elephants out of their crop fields. Sometimes villagers use what's called buffer cropping, where they plant crops that are meant to, I don't want to say satiate the elephant, but at least provide some food for the elephants that once the elephant gets to their crop field, they're not going to eat as much. So they try to use all these different strategies, but what's interested me is the fact that the elephants find ways around it. It might temporarily reduce crop loss. It might lead to the elephant spending less time in the crop fields overall, but inevitably the elephants figure out ways around it.
Dr. Plotnik's work might help address the problem.
We've designed this device called a targeted personality device, which allows us to play back 3 different types of sensory information. One is a light that can be set up to strobe or be unidirectional. Another is a auditory playback device that plays back auditory signals like vocalizations from humans, tigers, leopards, and also novel sounds. And then we're also testing an olfactory sprayer that sprays an odor. That could be the odor of humans. So for example, something we're testing right now might sound a little gross, but it's also kind of fun. Experimenters, villagers, rangers wear t-shirts. We give them t-shirts to wear for a couple days. They sweat in them. It's a hot tropical climate. And then we extract the body odor, the sweat, and then we spray that back towards the elephants. And the combination of all of this sensory information potentially can be targeted to individual elephants based on what we've already learned about them. All of these experiments on all these individual elephants we've identified allows us to create a cognitive/personality profile for individual elephants. That way, when we identify specific individuals that are coming into crop fields, we can manually program this device to display particular information based on what we know about that individual elephant. If we determine it's not that we have to target individual elephant personalities, but maybe there is a certain suite of traits that crop-rating elephants have. What makes a crop-rating elephant a crop-rating elephant? Maybe there are a suite of traits that every time they're programmed into this device, it has the highest rate of success of deterring elephants. And so instead of having to go into crop fields and saying to farmers, oh, okay, we're going to spend a couple of days or weeks identifying the elephants and we're going to then enact this experimental protocol, we can instead say to them, this is the way to program it. And you have to frequently change it because elephants are highly intelligent. They adapt very quickly. They habituate. So we're not going to always play the same sounds or the same smells. But there may be certain smells and certain sounds that we can alternate that we've learned are more successful in deterring elephants.
What does Dr. Plotnik hope will be the impact of this work?
We're fascinated by the learning process that elephants employ when they're working alone and together. That is not only tied to understanding cognition, but elephants frequently make decisions in the wild as a collective. How do they learn from each other about how to make decisions about foraging in crop fields or foraging in their natural habitat? And one way we're going to do that, I hope, is to continue this work on the targeted personality device research, exploring individual differences in how elephants living in different landscapes express their cognition, but also working on the ground with farmers, with the government, and in schools to educate people and to work collaboratively with people on ways to preserve and conserve the elephants' habitat and their lives for as long as we can.
We hope you'll come back in 2 weeks for another new episode. In the meantime, please share the Stories of Impact podcast with someone you think would love it. And we'd love to hear from you. You can get in touch at storiesofimpact.org. This has been the Stories of Impact podcast with an interview by Richard Sergey. Written and produced by Tavia Gilbert for Talkbox Productions. Music by Alexander Filipiak. Mix and master by Kayla Elrod. Executive producer Michelle Cobb. The Stories of Impact podcast is generously supported by Templeton World Charity Foundation.